Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me back. So I gave the title of this in advance, so it's wrong. So I rewrote it last night. And so this is called Love and Serve Where You Stand. And I went down to visit a friend in El Salvador a couple of weeks ago. His name is John Giuliano. And a lot of this is going to be about John. But on the way down there, I texted him, and I was like, I was feeling a lot of confusion. And I asked him, what is the right, what is the authentic moral response to fascism? And he just said, just that one line, love and serve where you stand. So I think I need to tell you a little bit about John. So John, he grew up in the Bronx. He's Italian American. He's got a great accent. And his whole life has been a dedication to this concept. When he was in third grade, he wrote to Cesar Chavez and asked to join the movement. And Cesar Chavez wrote back and was like, you should stay in school. Like a little while longer. But by the time he was in high school, he was living with in a group called the Catholic Worker. I don't know if you're familiar with Dorothy Day, but he was a devotee of Dorothy Day and hanging out with Dan Berrigan and Phil Berrigan. And these are all kind of radical Catholic priests and poets. And those were his mentors, and those were his guiding influences. And so when he finished high school and didn't know what to do, he asked them what to do, and they were like, "Oh, maybe you want to be a Jesuit." So he's like, "Okay, I'll try that." And so he went to seminary and he studied all the things to be a Jesuit, and then they sent him to Tijuana, where he was working with a group of nuns at a convent whose service was to a jail. So he's working in this jail for a couple of years. And he was doing what he was supposed to do, which is minister to the people at the first 2 or 3 floors of the jail. But eventually, he's like, well, what's happening on the 4th floor of the jail? Which they didn't want him to answer. They didn't want to answer him. But he found out, and apparently this is in the early 80s, the 4th floor of the jail was all refugees from Central America that were trying to escape a lot of the wars that our country was involved with in Central America in the 80s. And they ended up in this jail in Tijuana. And so he, following his calling, started smuggling them out of the jail and across the border. And this is John. This is you can't stop him from doing these kinds of things. That's what he's going to do. And so he was eventually kicked out of Mexico by the Mexican FBI. And the Jesuits are like, no, you have to get a master's in philosophy in Chicago. And somebody wrote to him from El Salvador, a priest from the Catholic University in El Salvador, Ignacio Yacuria. And Yacuria wrote to him and was like, you could also come and work in El Salvador, because I know that's important to you now. And so he did. So he left the path of the Jesuits and he went to El Salvador. And he started out kind of being a lay minister to the people during the beginning of the Civil War, and eventually joined in the Civil War as a combatant, and years later helped negotiate the peace accords. And so he went through this whole journey there that's given, there's a lot of depth there. But one of the things that happened during the war, and he explained this, I didn't know this part, he explained this to me a couple of weeks ago, was that our military had developed a strategy under General Westmoreland in Vietnam. He called it depopulation. I don't know if that's the English word or the anglicization of the Spanish word, but the idea is to make the war easier to just remove all the people through carpet bombing and Agent Orange. And we tried those techniques in Vietnam, kind of refined them a little bit, and then they used those in El Salvador. And so this whole part of the country where he was living had to flee, and they fled to Honduras, and there was a lot of hardship, as you can imagine, and ended up in a refugee camp, a UN refugee camp, for 7 years, which he did not appreciate. And he did not a fan of the UN refugee camps, and for him it was a prison camp, and they were basically prisoners and held in Honduras, I think until '87, and then in '87 they organized, and he went around to the 12,000 people in the camp, with his colleagues, and they're like, we want to go back to El Salvador, and we want to resist what's going on, but this time we're going to invite the news media and these like international organizations as kind of watchdog organizations. And so what we have to do this time, last time when they bombed, you ran, and the only people we're taking back are people who are not going to run. So we're going to go there and we're going to stay, no matter what happens to us. And so of the 12,800 people, families, volunteered to do that. So they did that, and they were there from '87 until '92. Those that survived that time. And then in '92, they brokered the peace accords. And John, he's from New York, right? So as soon as they brokered the peace accords, he was feeling very, very broken inside after everything he had seen and engaged in. And the way he mentioned it, he was like, we thought we were part of a revolution, and we were getting bombed. And the bombs actually, he has like fragments of the bombs that say, made in the USA on them, right? So they were killing us and bombing us, and in return, we were killing them. And he was, during this process, he was like, this is not a revolution. This is just people killing each other. He left, he went to New York, he got some healing, hung out with his mentors, and then he did a bike ride. He's really into all kinds of sports. He's a very sporty guy. And he rode 10,000 miles all across, tacking is the word he used. He tacked all across the United States, giving talks, and eventually rode back to El Salvador with a plan of what he wanted to do. And he wanted to start this organization in that same village called the Tamarindo. And tamarindo it's the Spanish word for the tamarind tree. And what was special about that tree is during the depopulation efforts, when they carpet bombed and burned everything, that was the one tree that did not burn. I don't know if it's due to some property of its oil or something, it didn't burn. And so his name for the group they started was called the Tamarindo, because that was their only goal, was not to burn, right, to stay there. And they started, the first year, their first project was to just go into the hills and find the dead and bury the dead. And then they just took it from there. So the reason, there's a lot of reasons I'm saying all this, but so in John's teaching, what he learned from the Jesuits is that in order to have a different way of treating each other, different social relations, we need this new society. So the Jesuits called it the new society. And the new society could not be made of those of us who grew up in the old society, because we just take all of our baggage and conditioning with us. So we had to be remade. So the way he puts it, the new society needs new people, new men, new women, new children. And that was the real project of the Tamarindo. And so it's so hard to describe, but you could imagine this is a tiny village. There's like nothing going on there. And the center, the Tamarindo Center, is like the YMCA. But it's all, and also the senior center, and also the food bank, and also like the soccer league, and every other community organization. It's in this one organization, in this one building. And the whole point, from John's perspective, there's two ways to look at it. Look at it from the inside or the outside. From the inside, the whole thing he's thinking this time, and people he's doing this with, is that it's about character formation. So in Spanish, they say formación. This is like, it's a kind of education that really is focused on values and character to create these new people. And from the outside, it looks like we're going to just get together and clean the town every Saturday. Or we're going to do reforestation efforts. Or we're going to start a roller hockey league and eventually win the Central American Cup for roller hockey, which he did, because he's really into sports. But it's all these things, that's what it looks like on the outside, but every single one of those projects is an excuse. It's a ruse. And the whole point is just character development. The whole point is just, let's come up with things that we have to do together as a group so we can be connected to each other and develop our sense of self and our sense of contribution. And so, when people, and he kept saying over and over, the Tamarindo is not a drop-in center. It's not like you just come and then it's not a babysitting thing. If you come with a commitment. Like in everyone, and this, to me, this is part of the core thing is that for him, every person has value and every person is making a contribution. And to show someone that they have value, you ask them to make a contribution. And so everyone to come to this center, they have these rules. And they're rules that anyone can follow. So from like a modern language, there's rules that don't have equity issues. So the rules are respect, like respect yourself, respect others, respect the environment, punctuality, and cleanliness. And there's running water in the village. They rigged up as the first project they did. They have springs and water. So everyone has access to what you need to do that. He's like, you come with those things, you show your respect, and then we just do everything together. So that was in 1992 that started. This is 34 years later. And so I hadn't been back in 25 years. So I went back to see what I could learn, right? And what we could all learn from this. And what's crazy about it is that the people who started as kids, were like 3 or 4 years old in 1992, are now running the whole place. You know? And the values have, it's like they planted, they were watered for 34 years, they flowered, and now they're just dropping seeds everywhere. And they're literally reforesting, but they're also like reforesting in terms of the people, right? And it's so beautiful. So I walked around with this one 20-year-old kid who'd been there his whole life, you know? And I was like, how is this possible? Like, how does this work? And he took me to the center. And so they have these two buildings. One is, has kind of a concrete floor, and it's just surrounded by art. It's just art everywhere. And that's where they do all their teaching workshops. They teach English, they teach art and theater, whatever all their activities are there. And the other one has it's like a soccer roller hockey arena. Those are like the two buildings. And half of the art building is just full of hockey. What do you call it? All the pads? Yeah, just like all these like skates and pads and sticks. It's all like incredibly well organized. They're really into sports, which I have never done. So I'm always like, wow, it's so fascinating. So I talked to this guy, this 20-year-old guy, and he's like, oh, the reason we can do all this is because of the work plan. The work plan is the key, la clave. The work plan is the key. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good to know. Show me the work plan. And it's everywhere in the taller, in the art building. And it's something you may have seen before, but their version of it is quite different. And so it says on the top, it's in Spanish, it says plan de trabajo, but in English it's work plan. And then this is my translation of it. And it says, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hate, let me sow love. Where there is injury, let me sow forgiveness. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is arrogance, humility. And where there is pain, joy. Again, this is my translation. When the shit hits the fan, may I seek to console instead of seeking consolation. May I seek to understand instead of seeking understanding. And may I seek to love instead of looking for love in all the wrong places. Because it is in giving that we receive, it is in forgiving that we are forgiven, and it is in dying to our egos that we are truly born. At the beginning of every activity in every meeting, whether it's about English classes or a scholarship fund or an ice hockey tournament, that's what they start with, and that is their work plan. That is actually what they're trying to get done through the activity. and is crystal clear that the activity is just a means to that end. And I almost like fell over. It's like, wow, okay, that's powerful. And so I want to illustrate that. So I have two stories about that. So one is this guy named Santos, who I remember from when I went 25 years ago, and he was, I think, around my age, maybe a year older, who was already kind of a leader at that point of the younger kids. And Santos, so another piece of context that's going to be illuminating here is that a few years ago, El Salvador made this transition that a lot of countries make from democracy to dictatorship. They elected a president who was not interested in having more elections. He consolidated power, and they're at a point where there's not a lot of legal rights, due process, civil rights. And one of the promises that he made that I think maybe he did pretty well is to reduce crime. And his method of reducing crime was to basically take many, many young people, men, and just put them in jail. So no hearings, no trials, no information to their families, none of the rights that we grew up with, and they grew up with, actually. And so, but it does have a positive effect on reducing crime. And it has a lot of negative effects, as you can imagine. So Santos, and one of the policies he put into place to help with this is that you could just call a number and denounce someone as a criminal, get paid $300, and that person would go to jail. And that's what happened to Santos. Somebody called and said that he was the leader of a criminal gang. He's actually a leader of the Tamarindo. And so he was one day, soldiers came to his house, put him in jail. And of course, John is working fervently every day for months to try and figure out where he is, what he's been charged with, what to do about it, that whole scene. But he told it, and he got out, so he told us this story. And he goes to this jail. I don't know if you've seen videos or pictures of what this looks like. They're available. But the jails, they have a room. I don't know the size. It could be this size. It could be double this size. But there's 600 men in the room. 2 holes in the ground. Some bunk beds. But everyone has an average of 2 square feet to stand on or sit on. Get your meal like in a plastic cup, where it's just like a little bean, a little egg, a little rice, tortilla, plastic cup, a couple times a day. All the care packages that were sent when the family finally figures out where they are go to the guards. But the guards let them have soap and toothpaste, toothbrush. Those are the only things that are let in. And so Santos gets into this environment, and of course, I think like any of us, it would be like, well, this is a mistake. I'm not supposed to be here. So he's trying to figure out when am I going to get my hearing? And he talks to the people who have been there for a while, and many of whom have been there for years. And they're like, oh no, this is not that. It's not that kind of scene. It's not a hearing and trial scene. This is like you just stay here until you die, kind of scene. And suicide is a big thing, of course, in that context. And so he's of course depressed and trying to figure out what to do. And so he goes. He's raised in this culture with John and also in a Catholic culture. And so he asks God. He's like, why did you send me here? Like what's going on? And he told us, he's like, I sat there and I thought that, and then I remembered the plan de trabajo, the work plan. And he's like, if I'm here, and if I'm going to make use of this, I'm going to use this not to seek consolation, but to console. And so he just started talking to everybody there and acting as an agent of hope and emphasis that we're going to get through this, you're going to do it. And it gave him this sense of meaning and contribution to be able to continue. And there's this, I don't know if you've heard of Admiral Stockdale in Korea. So he's a U.S. prisoner of war in Korea. And there's I don't know if he developed it, but there's this paradox named after him, the Stockdale paradox, where of these prisoners of war, the people who died quickest or went crazy or started collaborating with the other side were the people who they thought they would never get out. They started with no hope, and they were broken, right? And the people who died or went crazy or collaborated second were the people who were optimistic and thought they would get out immediately. Those are the people who got broken second. And the people who made it, like this Admiral Stockdale character and like Santos, were the people who thought, we'll get out one day, but I'm not going to put any timelines on it, and it's not going to be soon. And the point is to stay strong until it happens. So that's what he did. And it took 4 months, and he got out. And every 15 days, he has to go 3 hours to the capital city to check in. He's like on probation without the crime or the trial or anything. But he's on probation. And every time he goes, he texts John. He's like, I'm going into the courthouse. And because they could just put him in jail again for however long they want. And then he texts when he comes out. So every 15 days, everyone in the village has a little moment, like a sigh of fear and relief around that. But the point, he's an incredible person, but the point is the work plan, right? And the role, what I'm learning from this is how we can use the work plan as a tool in our everyday lives. The second story is they started a scholarship program. So, John's doing this work. He's been there since 1992. He has a lot of supporters. He gave all those talks, and people want to give money, of course. They want to start a nonprofit, of course. John has no interest in nonprofits. But, people want to send money. They want to have scholarships. They help build the hockey floor and all these things. It's really incredible. And so they're like, okay, great. We can send people to college. And he's like, all right, we'll have this application process. So they have an application process, and they realize that all these people apply because scholarship it's huge in El Salvador, right? But they can't tell the difference between who's applying for real and who's just like looking for money. And everyone's got a sob story because everyone lived through the same war. And everyone's life was destroyed by the war. Everyone. So there's no it's all real, but it's hard to know who really cares. And so they have this, they go through this for a couple of years. They end up giving scholarships to a few people. It doesn't work out at all. And then they go back to the work plan. And they're like, all right, how do we want to redo this as Tamarindos? How can we do it the way we do it, not the way some NGO would do it? And they're like, oh, anyone who wants to get the scholarship should just come and work for us for a year and spend time in this community, and then they'll know if this is for them or if we're for them. And it just changed everything. And now every single person who's even just willing to do that gets the scholarship, goes to college, and then he hires them, and then they have work because he always needs more people to work, right? So I chose this topic today just because I went to El Salvador, but also because I think it might be relevant, The people in Guarjila, the members of the Tamarindo, they've been on hard times for 60 years, their entire lives. The reason the Civil War started is because there was incredible poverty and income inequality, and all of the institutions were corrupt and against the people, right? And in the Tamarindo, they're still full of hope and action, working together as individuals and as a community every day. So, does that feel relevant to your lives? Yes. To this moment? Yeah. So, despair is a tool. Despair is not accidental. Despair is a tool. And for a small, powerful group of people to control a large group of people, and I'm thinking of English imperialism in India. There's many other examples you might think of. Despair is essential because no matter the size of the military hardware, when you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 and the people want to act, they can do what they want. And so the key thing in preventing like real revolution, real social change. And that's what John said. He's like, the war, that wasn't a revolution. We were just killing each other. The tamarindo, that's the revolution, right? In order to prevent that, despair is essential. Because if you believe that you can act and your actions will be worthwhile, then you will do so and you'll change something. But if 999 people out of 1,000 are despairing and overwhelmed all the time, then you won't act, and it'll be fine for those who are interested in control, right? So how did the tamarindo, so the main battle then is the battle against despair. So how did the tamarindo do it? What we've seen is the work plan, the shared values, the shared experience of working together for decades, some of which was living through a war together. Not everybody has that. So we can replicate some of those things. And some of those things we can't or don't want to. But there's another tool that really stuck with me that I want to share with you, which I call the lineage. So when you go to John's office, so lineage, right? A line. And from the geometry, the mathematical definition, it's infinite, right? Not a line segment, but a line. Goes on in both directions. And John never said anything about this, but I just picked this up in his office. There's 25 framed photographs, something like that. And every single one is of a mentor of his. Many of whom there were personal mentors in his life, like Dorothy Day or the Berrigans. Some of whom are just historical figures. But every single one of those people is a hero that shares his values, that shares his actions, and then he can look to for support. So he looks up from whatever he's doing and he sees Oscar Romero, the Archbishop of El Salvador, whose assassination started the Civil War. Or he sees Gandhi, or Martin Luther King, or Cesar Chavez, or Dorothy Day. And for me, it's like every time you see that, you don't see just the teacher, but you see the teaching. And you remember the teaching, right? Everywhere he looks, he's reminded what he was given by these people and what he can do, his potential. So compare that to reading the news. Right? The feeling of reading the news. I'm not saying the information is bad to have, but what's the feeling? Right? Despair, overwhelm, right? And now just measure how much time you spend with your lineage versus how much time you spend with the news. And John reads the news, but he spends hours surrounded by his lineage every day, much more than he spends focused on the news, right? And that to me is a huge boost of inspiration. It's like standing next to a giant that is pulling you upwards. And I know that feeling because I was standing next to him, and I'm like, oh, this is what I need to feel great. Is to just, and we were at this cocktail party kind of last night at his house, and I went over to stand next to him. This is something Joe does a lot. And he's like, oh, do you need something? And I was like, no, I just want to stand next to you. I just enjoy, I can feel the benefit of standing next to you. You know, the other thing about remembering that lineage is that all of those people, they're proof that whatever you're feeling right now and whatever conditions are happening right now, those have happened before. This is not the first time. Like, I look at a picture of Gandhi and I can compare. Like, things are rough, right? Things are scary right now in the US for me. Really scary. But were they scarier or scary for Gandhi? Yeah. Were they scary for Martin Luther King? Yeah. Were they scary for Cesar Chavez? They were really scary. So this is not the first time that we've been scared, and people succeeded. So it's a constant reminder that these problems are real and they are surmountable by humans, right? There's one story. I'm just trying to share what I learned, right? So there's one story that really stuck with me. He's a picture of this Catholic priest from World War II. His name is Max Kolbe. You guys ever heard of this guy? I had neither. There's probably lots of people like this that we've never heard of. And he was Polish. Germans invaded Poland in 1939, and he was a friar, some kind of priest. He had a friary, which is, I guess, a place where a friar hangs out. And he hid 2,000 Jews for years in his friary, and he was publishing religious tracts that were actually just anti-Nazi propaganda until they caught him, and they took him away to Auschwitz. And one day at Auschwitz, somebody escaped successfully. And so to punish, I guess, I don't know how they do things. This is how they do things, apparently. To punish the people, they picked 10 people at random to execute. And one of the guys they picked just immediately started crying. My wife, my children. And so this guy, he just volunteers. He's like, can I take his place? And they're like, okay. And so he goes with the other 9 people, and they're starved for 2 weeks. That was how they were going to kill them. But after 14 days, and he's just leading them in songs the entire time. No food, no water, 2 weeks, just songs, like joyful songs, until they slowly die one by one. And at the end, he's not dead, and so they have to give him some sort of lethal injection or something. And he's just singing the entire time till the moment he dies. And every time John looks up and turns his head left, that's what he sees. That's what he sees. The other thing, piece of art that I really liked, is a woodblock engraving. So, you guys know that style of art? It's just like an engraving of a bunch of people in a bread line, so like kind of bums looking for free food, the bread line, government support, and they're just down and out, as you would imagine. And in the middle, and they all have their little bowl, and in the middle is Jesus. And it's called Jesus in the bread line. And it's like, he's not above, not below, he's not helping, he's just right in between in the bread line. And that's, every time someone said, we're so happy how you're helping the people in El Salvador here, John was like, we're not helping. This is not about helping someone else. This is about living together. This is about accompanying people. And he would just point them to that piece of art. So, what's an authentic moral response to fascism? Love and serve where you stand.